So today I'd like to just give a bit of time for us to reflect on, I suppose, to put it simply, what it means to be in the world. We can, within these circles, these circles aiming to help move beyond an ordinary understanding of reality and of ourselves, begin to build notions or concepts around the idea of stillness. But life itself is not still. It's continuously moving in a state of flux. And so while we are engaging in the world through the body and the mind, we are experiencing this. And so the idea of stillness is challenged. And there's something very romantic, very alluring about the idea of experiencing a serenity, a peace, a stillness, where we're free from the demands of others and the demands we make of ourselves. And in our formal practice, we can get an opportunity to move towards that experience. But our formal practice, our meditation practice, isn't the totality of our reality. In fact, most of our experience of being as it is at present is through the body in relation to the world around us. And so stillness isn't something that can be expected, because that's not the nature of the manifest world. And so we experience this push and this pull as we engage in life. There's a push and pull. And when we enter into meditation practice, we become appreciative that this push and pull isn't something that is only experienced in terms of our gross outward relationships and engagements with the world, but is in fact something which is going on within us. There's a push and pull which is taking place within us. And by a push and pull, I suppose what I'm pointing towards is demands. Demand for our attention, where we put our focus, where our consciousness is directed. And so in the outside world, this will be the demands of our families, of our friends, of those dear to us, but also the demands of society and the conventions of our societies that we live in. There's certain demands. Some of these are more obvious and some are less obvious. And they don't usually come one at a time. There's usually multiple at a time. And so even for you here, engaging in this practice, as we did this morning, you put a demand upon yourself to be here, to show up. This is your own personal demand, something you put on yourself. But it has to take into consideration the demands of those you might be living with, or the demands of whatever other things you have going on, which is calling to you, which is pulling at you. And so demands are coming from outside, how the external world calls on us, pulls on us, pushes at us, but they also come from within. And the idea of showing up here for this practice today, that doesn't sound like a very challenging demand that we put on ourselves. But we can put very challenging demands on ourselves. We can be very unfair on what we expect of ourselves. We can be, in a word, an extreme taskmaster. And so we're experiencing this push and pull from outside and from within. And in very crude terms, this could be spoken about as the tension between the relationship of us as subjects, as entities with a particular perspective, in relation to an outside world who sees us as an object which can facilitate and satisfy particular demands. So we experience this tension of the subject-object relationship, where we experience ourselves as being both a subject and an object. So when we talk about our relationship to being in the world and moving through life, we're trying to learn how to balance this. Balance our experience of ourselves as a subject and as an object, of ourselves as an individual with demands and as an individual who is being demanded upon. And so we're trying to navigate this. Now, I was thinking earlier of an analogy for this, because in yoga, we'll know of yogasana, of the different postures that are performed as a way of facilitating the flow of prana. But depending on your relationship to these postures, they can be seen as being beneficial for many different reasons. But when we carry out a posture, we are having to engage the body with the environment that we're in. So we have a relationship with ourselves at a subjective level in relation to the world, where we can, in very crude terms, talk of ourselves as being an object within the world. If we take into consideration the idea of standing, quite a simple body posture, in its essence, we understand what standing is. So if we're standing, we could do this for any other posture, sitting or whatever it might be, but for the sake of the example, standing, when the surface that we are being supported by is hard, it allows us to stand steady. We feel secure. We're able to stand stable. Our 2 feet on the ground, we're able to feel what the surface demands of us. And we can feel the certainty that it provides, the predictability. And so standing in relation to this surface becomes easier. If we compare it to standing on a trampoline, if you've had the good fortune of standing on a trampoline of late, then you'll know that the surface is the opposite. It's unsteady and unpredictable. And so there's a requirement, a demand on us to pay attention to the surface, to recognize how it moves and react and respond to it accordingly, making these little micro adjustments to ensure that we stay in a standing position. So it's quite different to standing on a hard surface. But we can also just extend this example to standing on one leg, where you try to stand on one leg and all of a sudden the composition of the body shifts. So now it's not so much what the external world has asked of us, but the extra demand we've put on ourselves by standing on one leg. All of a sudden we have to readjust our whole body composition. And there's a unpredictability which we've put on the situation because of the fact that we're now on one leg. The surface may be hard, may be stable, may be predictable, but we're on one leg. And so we have added a degree of uncertainty to the situation. And we need to react and respond in accordance with that. And then if we compare all of this to standing in water, or perhaps even floating in water, and there's something which occurs when we are engaging in water like this, that if we're lying out in water, the act is quite passive. We can float on it. If we try to stand in that water, depending on the current, we may have to readjust our standing position. If there's not much current and it's still, maybe it's quite salty, it means there's greater buoyancy, which means that we have to exert less effort to standing. And so we adapt according to the outside external conditions. So all of this is to highlight that how we're navigating at this very physical level, how we're navigating and experiencing the world as a subject, engaging with the world who sees us, once again in crude terms, as an object, requires us to be continuously assessing and reassessing and evaluating what's taking place and responding to it accurately, as appropriately as we can, to maintain balance so as to keep ourselves upright. Now we could say that there's three things at play which allow for this. We need to have body strength. We need to have mobility and agility. And we need to have stamina. So there's three factors at play in order for us to be able to stand upright. The muscles in our legs, the muscles in our bodies to keep us upright. Mobility, that we'll be able to adapt, assess the surface we're on, and adapt in ways which allows us to stay upright. And then stamina, and endurance, a capacity to keep on going as the surface keeps changing. Now we can compare all of this. We can take this yogasana, this simple body posture, and relate it back to the overall practice of yoga, of union, of bringing together. And so within yoga, it's not just about the physical body. It also includes the other layers of being, which include our emotional state, our mental state, and our capacity to remain attentive. And so for us, when we move out of this yogasana, when we move off the mat, let's say, or even if we just move away from this example of the standing position, and we think about how we're engaging in life and moving through life, and the idea of maintaining balance regulating our movements so that we're always experiencing balance. We can look towards the yamas and niyamas, the principles which are offered within yoga, and we can pick out three of them and align them with what we've spoken about. So we've spoken about, in terms of the physical body, we need to have strength, we need to have mobility, and we need to have stamina. In terms of how we move through life as practitioners, yoga offers the principle of tapas, which is discipline. So we're aiming to coordinate our movements in a manner which is disciplined. Yoga also offers the principle of Ahimsa, where we're aiming to move through life without causing harm to others, but also to ourselves. And the other principle is that of Ishvara Pranidhana, surrender. Now we can take these three principles and we can correlate them to the factors that were needed for being able to stand up. The example we gave, we needed three factors to be able to stay in a standing position, balanced and upright. If we're going to stay in a position where we are balanced, upright, and able to move through life, we rely on tapas, we self-discipline, we rely on ahimsa, non-violence, and we rely on Ishvara Pranidhana. Now, tapas could be seen as being the strength, the fire, the ability to get involved, to take on. Ahimsa would be the opposite. It could be seen as the capacity to just allow ourselves to be more passive, considerate of ourselves. And then Ishvara Pranidhana, surrender, basically meaning to be absolutely passive, to let go. So tapas is a highly active engagement. We're applying effort to a great degree. The opposite is Ishvara Pranidhana, surrender, where we're not applying any effort. We're trusting, we're surrendering. And ahimsa falls in the middle of the spectrum, where we are able to assess how much our effort and our applying of ourselves is going too far or not going far enough. So it's a spectrum of activity to passivity. Activity tapas to passivity, Ishvara Pranidhana, and in the middle we have ahimsa. But it's not a stable, singular factor which is going to keep us balanced. It's rather an interplay of these three. So much like when we're standing upright, we rely on strength, mobility, and stamina. In order to be able to move through the world, we have to be able to endure. We have to be able to apply ourselves, to use our effort, to get involved. We have to be able to challenge ourselves. But if we challenge ourselves too much, if we use too much effort, If we're too forceful and we push too hard, then things get out of balance. We may experience it as burnout. We may experience it as physical discomfort, an inappropriate amount of physical discomfort. We may experience it in many different ways. Perhaps a response from the people that we've been engaging in, perhaps arguments. There's a whole array of different ways that when we apply too much effort or apply too much force, that it can come back at us. And again, this can be come back at us from the outside world or internally. So tapas is important, but we can't only use tapas. As much as strength is important for standing up, but it's not the only thing that we're reliant on. So we also have ahimsa, and ahimsa allows us to adjust. It allows us to see when we might be going too far, too much effort, exerting ourselves too much, using too much force, whether on something external or in regards to ourselves internally. And so we lighten up, we soften our approach. We don't want to cause harm. We take a step back. And we can think of these in terms of yoga asanas or any type of physical activity where it might be uncomfortable for us to perform a certain body posture. But we try. But we're measuring and we're assessing our engaging with that process. The trying, the applying ourselves to the challenge, that's tapas. But we're assessing the situation to see if the heat which is being created, the challenge which is being experienced, is moving too much towards harm. And in our bodies, at a physical level, we can experience this by pulling muscles, aches and pains, and all of these kind of things. So there's this play, and it's not a singular, fixed factor. It's an interplay between discipline and between non-hurting, non-harming. And then at the other end, we have the capacity to just surrender, to trust in the events that are unfolding, to trust in our own capacities. And this is extremely passive. So now we're not applying effort. We're not using any force. We're just letting things be, which is not necessarily easy. To let go and to surrender our agency, to see what might become of things. So this is demanding in and of itself. But there's also an interplay between letting go and ahimsa. Because if we do let go, we surrender our agency, we don't apply any effort whatsoever. This can also cause harm, not just to ourselves, but also to others. So we have to measure. We have to be vigilant, discerning between what's being experienced, to assess how we are progressing moment to moment. And if our stepping back to the point of allowing things to unfold without getting involved is bringing about harm, then we'll have to engage the other factors. We'll have to apply ourselves, re-engage tapas, discipline. And so too much of any one of these is not the answer. Too much tapas, self-discipline, is not the answer. Too much ahimsa is not the answer. And too much Ishvara Pranidhana, letting go, is not the answer. The answer is not singular. It's made up of these variables. And so while there is a desire, a want for us to be able to experience balance as a constant, something which is steady, stable, and reliable, that is a fantasy. Because while we engage in life as it expresses, and we celebrate its expression, we are active participants. And as active participants, we are being asked to be attentive, be alert to the processes as they unfold, moment by moment, and to assess continuously our way of engaging with these processes, exerting more effort when needed and backing off when needed. So it's an unfolding process which is continuous. And so to think that we are going to be able to arrive at a point when the process has ended, while also being alive within the process, is deluding ourselves. Now, much like when we are trying to stand up, we engage the different factors of strength and stamina and mobility. We become very alert and attentive to the fact that all of these factors, all of these capacities are needed to stay upright in a standing position. We become very alert and attentive to this as we grow into older age, when we understand and appreciate the importance of strength, but not just strength, of mobility, and not just that, but also stamina. As we move on in years physically, we start to appreciate how all of these were important. Same too, as we continue with our practice and reflecting, we begin to appreciate the interplay between discipline, non-harming, and surrender. But for the sake of reflection, we could bring it right back now to whatever posture you're in right now, be it standing or sitting, and just to pay attention these moments. How much of your posture is passive? Meaning, how much of your posture is dependent on some thing that is giving you support, be it a cushion or an armrest or the back of a chair. If you're standing, maybe you're leaning on something. What's supporting you? Whatever's supporting you, you have trust in it. You're passively engaging with it. But there's also In that posture, the need for you to be engaged. There's muscles which are activated to some degree or another. And you can pay attention and see which muscles are being engaged. So in your posture right now, as you're listening to this, you can reflect on that interplay of passive and active. And how you maybe, as a consequence of just listening to this and reflecting, have adjusted yourself and readjusted your position. The awareness causes you to adapt. So now we can continue this reflection on how we are relating to our lives. Looking at how we are relating to our lives at present. And taking into consideration these three factors, these three pillars, which facilitate our being able to remain balanced. Discipline and effort, adjustment and ahimsa, and surrender and trust. So of these three, when you reflect on your life, is there one that might be neglected? One which might need greater voice? Perhaps you've been leaning too much towards using force and effort as an attempt to bring everything into balance. But it doesn't do that. It doesn't bring about balance. Or perhaps you've given up your agency and you've been trusting too much, expecting for some thing to just unfold, to guide you, to support you, for things to just happen, where you're not being active enough. Or perhaps it's a case of not engaging with ahimsa enough. And ahimsa would be that capacity to adapt through appreciating and understanding the nature, the texture of the situation. That you haven't been able to let go and surrender more, or you haven't been able to exert more effort when needed. So these three principles are offered within yoga. Understanding that the idea of yoga, the idea of union, is not that we experience a state where we're no longer called upon as participants in the play of life. That's not what it's about. We will continue to be participants in the play of life, and as participants, our task, our role, is to know when to engage more actively or more passively. But for us to find balance is not in expecting that it'll arrive in some packaged form and everything will be fixed, but rather to appreciate that it's an unfolding process, moment to moment. And that life and how it expresses is dependent on our capacity to allow it to unfold. And as we do so, with greater ease, the more balance we experience. And then, as a consequence of that, we experience peace.